I'm Stephanie Howe, co-host of Get Inspired and Innovate, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Coming up on episode number 163 of the House of EdTech podcast, I've got an update about the future of the podcast. We're going to give you a recommendation on how to do voice notes and audio feedback in Google. We've got a House of EdTech VIP, and this is the crossover episode you've been waiting for as I joined forces with Maddie from the EdTech Classroom podcast. Strike up the band. Welcome to the House of EdTech podcast. I am your host, Chris Nessie. The House of EdTech explores how technology is changing the way teachers teach and the impact that technology is having in education. I discuss technology that is changing our classrooms and schools, and I share tools and tips that you can hear today and use tomorrow. You're going to hear the stories of teachers, leaders, and creators just like you. The purpose? Whether you use it or not, technology is changing the way you teach and how your students learn. Welcome. This is episode 163. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It doesn't matter when you listen. I am just happy that you make House of EdTech part of your anytime, anywhere professional development. Got a jam-packed episode today. Lots of important things going on. Things are moving and shaking. School has started for me, so I am doing school and social studies from where I sit right now. The boys are home, school is starting, and I don't know about you, but I need to take a breath. I need to focus, and, well, I'm going to have some time on my hands to do that because, as I said in the last episode, in 162, that I am going to be putting the show on hiatus. But that's not the case because this podcast has such an awesome community. So in episode 162, I announced that I would be putting the podcast on a hiatus after this episode, 163, because of my need for improved balance between work and home and my extracurricular activities like this podcast. So what happened? Many listeners reached out in support of my decision, as I very much expected people to do, and everyone who reached out understood my thinking, whether it was a DM on Twitter or a message on Voxer or a handful of emails that I got. Everybody understood why I was going to be doing what I was going to be doing and, sympathized with how tough it would be, and also expressed that they would be missing the show. But one person who reached out did so with a much different sentiment and a much different idea. Derek Larson, former multi-time guest of the podcast, he reached out before even finishing listening to me talk about taking a break, and he offered to host the show for me and not have the show have to take a break. I thought about it. I talked about it with Caitlin, and I am excitedly going to take Derek up on his offer. So the show, this wonderful podcast that I've been doing since 2014, is not going to take a break. For at least the next 6 episodes, that would be 164 through 169, Derek Larson will be hosting the podcast. So this is kind of like when Jimmy Fallon or Jimmy Kimmel, they take a break during the summer, but their show still goes on, and they just have a guest host do the show. I've already spoken with Derek at length, and he's very excited to sit in the power chair, and he's got some great episodes planned. You will be in very good hands, and I'm actually excited to be a listener of my own show. Now, just to pull back the curtain a little bit, I do listen to every episode of the House of EdTech when I release it. Obviously, I listen to it when I write it. I listen to it when I'm recording it because I'm talking out loud. And I listen on my iPhone in my car when the episode comes out. It's called quality control. And only maybe once or twice in the last 6+ years have I listened to it after the fact on my phone and was like, uh-oh, there's a mistake. But anyway, so I'm looking forward to listening as well. The structure of the show will remain the same, so you can expect the same great segments. So there'll be great recommendations. You'll get Derek's EdTech thought, and there'll be some great featured content, possibly some guests and awesome conversations that Derek will have with other people. There will be House of EdTech VIPs and more. So I am very excited. So I would have announced this sooner, but this is why you listen. So I'm excited that the podcast will not be going away. You will next hear my voice when we get to the end of the year, when I do that EdTech Smackdown for 2020. So again, start to think about those submissions, and Derek, over the next few episodes, will be reminding you to get those submissions to me by December 1st, 2020. So keep that in mind. And Derek, thank you so much from me to you for stepping up and just, filling my heart with joy that the podcast doesn't have to go anywhere. And you who's listening, you are the big beneficiary of this happening, because you still get the podcast, you still get great content, and I can't ask for anything more than for you to continue to be supported. So I'm not going in, well, I'm going somewhere, but Derek's going to step in. It's going to be fantastic. And, the next episode is coming. Episode 164 will be in your ears 2 weeks from when I release this on September 6th. So the show will keep on going, and I'm very, very excited. Now, let's get to my EdTech recommendation. This episode's recommendation is Moat, M-O-T-E. You can find it at the website justmoat.me. I'll put a link to the Google Chrome extension in the show notes out at chrisnessy.com/163. But what does Moat let you do? Moat enables voice note feedback within Google Classroom, Google Docs, and more. Moat is an add-on for Classroom, Docs, Slides, and Sheets, and Moat makes it really easy, like stupid easy, for teachers like you and teams to create voice note comments and feedback on documents and inside of Google Classroom. Moat has created the fastest, friendliest, and most flexible way to give feedback. Now, I'm a podcaster. Using my voice is super easy. Yes, I like to write, but I like to write with a pen. And if I'm using Google Classroom, I'm not really going to write with a pen. I mean, I could, but that's just a whole bunch of technology that right now I don't have time for. So I'm going to be using Moat. You should check out Moat. It's free. Well, there are some paid options, but you can start for free and you get unlimited voice notes. There is a 30-second limit. So if you can be efficient with your words, that'll work. And with the free plan, there is no transcription. But if you're leaving audio, do we really need transcription? That's just me. You can follow them on Twitter so you can ask questions and get support. They're on Twitter at JustMoatHQ. And again, check out their website, justmoat.me. And of course, there will be a link to the Chrome extension in the show notes at chrisnessy.com/163. And that's my EdTech recommendation for this episode. Go check out Moat and let me know what you think. So here we are. We've reached the big crossover episode that I teased a couple episodes ago, and I'm about to play for you a fantastic conversation that I had with Maddie from the EdTech Classroom podcast. Buckle up, listen twice, get your notepads out, and we are going to dive right in. But first, a word from this episode's sponsor, Whitebook. Are you a teacher who fosters creativity in your class? Are you the person who wants to save and easily organize all your notes, drawings, and doodles? Let's talk about Wipebook. I've been using their great alternative to paper notebooks and flip charts for a month now. The Wipebook flip chart is the perfect marriage between paper flip charts and whiteboards. A Wipebook flip chart comes with 20 surfaces per set, 10 double-sided sheets, one plain and the other is graph paper. Each sheet measures 2 feet by 3 feet. And their accompanying app, the Wipebook Scan, which is available for iOS and Android, their app allows you to easily digitize, organize, and sync your work to Google Drive and other popular cloud storage services. If you're tired of wasting paper and money, you should try the Wipebook Flip Chart or one of their other products like the Wipebook Mini Scan, Notebook, or Workbook. Go to wipebook.com and get 30% off when you use the promo code HouseOfEdTech at checkout. If you're in a position to order in bulk for your district, you can get 40% off if you visit wipebook.com/HouseOfEdTechBulk. That's Wipebook, WIPEBOOK. Thank you, Wipebook, for supporting this episode of the House of EdTech.
Everyone, my name is Maddie, and I'm the host of the EdTech Classroom podcast. I help teachers explore innovative and creative learning models in their classrooms. I'm very passionate about project-based learning, all things related to EdTech and teaching. I'm a K-5 STEM teacher, so I spend a lot of time working with kids in the classroom, and I know that this 2020-2021 school year is pretty crazy for everybody, so I'm happy to be here today talking with Chris, and we're going to have a great time.
We are going to have fun. My name is Chris Nessie, and I am the host of the House of EdTech podcast. And this is a special crossover episode between two, are we EdTech superheroes? Is this like a CW thing? Yeah, here we are, a special episode of both podcasts and a little opportunity for you to get to know each of us to the respective audiences. I am a high school social studies teacher by day, and by night, I am a husband, a father, a college professor, podcast editor. I do a lot of things that keep me out of trouble.
So many hats. I can barely keep track.
Yeah. What other hats do you wear, Maddie?
Not nearly as many as you.
It's not about the number. It's how many directions you get pulled in. But as you said, we are both interested in project-based learning. That is the theme of my high school history classroom. It's been years, and I happily say it's been years, since I've given a traditional test, quiz, homework. It is all projects all the time in my classroom at the high school level. That's changed my teaching. It's changed the rapport and relationships that I have with my students by making my class project based, because let's be honest, once I tell kids on the first day of school I don't do tests, quizzes, and homework, they buy in.
That's awesome. Yeah, like I said, I'm a K-5 STEM teacher. So for me, luckily in the K-5 level, we don't really do too many quizzes or tests. But I love doing things that are hands-on with kids. I think project-based learning is really what made me fall in love with education, fall in love with being a teacher. Even as a student, I think it's what really got me excited about learning. I remember to this day my very first project-based learning experience in high school. And so I knew that when I decided I wanted to become a teacher, that it was really something I wanted to incorporate in my classroom. And so as a STEM teacher, I feel very lucky that the curriculum is not quite as set in stone as other subjects. So I've been able to be really flexible with the different types of teaching that I'm able to do in my classroom. So it's really lended itself well to project-based learning, I think.
Well, I can agree with that in terms of even social studies. At least here in New Jersey, it's not a standardized tested subject. I don't ever have to worry about this big test that's looming in history, whether it's World or US 1 or anything like that. It's not like New York State where they have like the Regents. The closest, that I could get to is if I was teaching, an advanced placement course at the high school level. That's not something that every kid is going to do. I also have the latitude to, again, I do what I want. And I've kind of been doing that even before I had the little, tenure T next to my name. I always focus on doing what's right for my students and giving them that opportunity to, be creative, to collaborate, to communicate, and to critically think, and just kind of using social studies as the vehicle, again, has been something that's been great for my kids.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. I think that really closely aligns with my personal philosophy for teaching. I really love having a very student-centered approach to teaching. But I think something that you said reminded me that even though in both of our experiences, we do have a lot of flexibility in our curriculum. One thing that I do really like to tell teachers is that you can still do project-based learning in a classroom that has, really rigid curriculum or really, rigid state standards, different things like that. And so you don't just have to be doing project-based learning in a classroom that's as flexible as, K through 5 STEM curriculum, for example.
Now, actually, let me ask you, Maddie. You mentioned your own experience as a student. What was that project or what did that teacher do that got you interested in education and project-based learning?
So my junior year of high school, I was living in New York City, and I, in one of my high school social studies classes, I can't really remember what the name of the actual course was, but it was basically a course about urban planning. And so luckily, one of the affordances of being in a big city like New York is that we were able to go on a lot of, really amazing field trips. And so we had a 1 week long project where, but when I say 1 week long project, basically from 8 a.m. until 4 p.m. every single day was dedicated to this project. It was sort of a special unit that we did junior year of high school. And so we looked at, pretty much every single element of the Brooklyn Bridge in New York City. So it was called the Brooklyn Bridge Project. And, on the first day, yeah. And so on the first day, we read tons of literature about the Brooklyn Bridge. So, we spent time, reading very closely, short stories, essays, poems, different things like that. And then, one of the other days we actually went on a field trip to the Brooklyn Bridge where we then reread those poems on the physical bridge. And then, another day we got to meet with urban planners and historians and talk about, how bridges and tunnels can change the culture of the city. And then, at the end of the week, we had to create some sort of public product, as you often do with PBL units. And we basically had free reign to share our thoughts on anything that we felt like we had learned that week using any sort of medium. It was a very open-ended project. And I remember, I think I created a movie using iMovie on my laptop. Basically, practice video editing skills, which was something that I was really passionate about in high school, but didn't really have an outlet to explore. And so, yeah, it was a really, really great project. He's such an incredible teacher. So it's neat, like I said, that I got a chance to reconnect with him not too long ago.
My education sucked because I think I was thinking back as you're telling your story. One, what an experience. Being somebody who's living in New Jersey and I could go to New York City anytime I want. Sorry. Not sorry. When I went to high school, the one project that stood out to me that was, I guess I'll classify it as project-based learning, was I was a sophomore in a history class, and we had to budget and plan a trip, like a road trip, all around the country where we had to find out the cost of hotels, and we had to hit certain landmarks and find out the cost of tickets and travel. And I mean, I didn't actually get to do that. And I mean, maybe before I die, I will get to take a trip like that. But man, I lived close and I never got to do a cool project like yours. But what does stand out for me in my, sucky education, no, it was great, is when I got to do hands-on things that allowed me to be creative and think beyond read this section, answer the 4 questions. I mean, one of my history classes, and she was a fantastic teacher when I was a freshman, we went to class and the notes were written on the chalkboard, green chalkboard, white chalk, and she spent the 45-minute period like going through the outline that was already written on the board while we were feverishly copying the notes down. So I remember that. The one sort of hands-on thing that we did was she was the cheerleading coach. And one day, freshman year, she said, today we're going to learn this brand new dance. And we're like, what? So we cleared the desk. And when I was in high school, I spent a history class learning the Macarena.
Awesome.
Not exactly project-based learning, but it's those experiences that have impacted me as a teacher that, I mean, I'm not teaching my kids how to dance. If you've ever seen me dance, you don't want me teaching that. But it's those experiences that we want our kids to be exposed to. You know, that higher order thinking, that creativity. Again, I always go back to those 4 C's: communication, collaboration, creativity, and critical thinking. That's what I want my kids to do. And project-based learning lets students do that. And I tell my kids, I don't care how much history you learn. And I tell them, it's not about the history. I said, I'm not there to get you ready to play Jeopardy, you know? So
I am. Just kidding.
I mean, if they want to. I mean, I've had kids come in and say, hey, there was a category on Jeopardy. I'm like, okay, you probably got it right. I don't care. I'm not in it for the history. I like the themes of history, but I tell my students, I want those 4 C's. I want you to be better at them at the end of the year than you are right now at the start of the year. And that's going to look different for all of you. But if you put in the effort, if you work hard and you try, you will grow. And that's all I want. So that's why I lean on projects, because it allows me to do all 4 of those things.
Totally. And I think even when I know I told that story in a really roundabout way, but I remember that project like it was yesterday. I'm not the best storyteller, but I remember it so well. And I think that when you ask most people what they remember from, their high school experience or their time in the K through 12 school system, they remember the projects that they did. That's the stuff that sticks with them. They don't necessarily remember, algebra, no offense to any algebra teachers out there, but they don't necessarily remember, the very specific details of an algebra lesson, but they remember the really, incredible projects that you do with your students. I think obviously core competencies and standards are really important for a reason, and students still need to be getting those. But the projects are the stuff that resonate with kids, and the projects are the things that make them, be excited to be learning every day, be excited to get up and go to school. At least that's how it's been for me.
And hopefully for you who's listening, I'm sure you can relate to these stories and how we feel about, these projects. Maddie, why don't we get into some actual maybe strategies or real world applications? Would you like to kind of kick that off for us here?
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, I certainly think something that's pretty timely is talking about project-based learning in this new normal that is the 2020-2021 school year. My school personally, we are starting the year off remote. We actually just started on Monday. So we are, doing distance learning for the foreseeable future. So I've definitely been thinking a lot about how I can still incorporate project-based learning in my lessons in a remote environment. And then, of course, I know that a number of schools are also in sort of this hybrid model right now, 2 days on, 2 days off. And then, some schools, even if you are having, face-to-face instruction right now, all these, social distancing measures that are in place are making classrooms look very, very different. So I think no matter what your situation is, it can be hard to visualize what project-based learning, could look like in this new classroom setting, whether you're virtual or 100% in person. I just think things are different. That probably goes without saying. So yeah, I think maybe that could be a good place for us to start.
As I start the year, I said before we started recording, in my school, we are basically taking the traditional school day and we are doing it 100% remote. So my high school is slated to be virtual for the first half of the school year. So first and second marking period. Students have their schedules and they will hop from Google Meet to Google Meet to Google Meet over the course of the school day, as will I as the teacher. I have my schedule. I teach the first period of the day, the second period of the day, and then I have lunch and prep while I'm sitting at home. And then I teach the last block of the day. So I teach the 3 classes. And I'll be honest, I am scared because I know I'm a good teacher, but I am scared that I will fail, that I will not do a good job in accomplishing what I want to accomplish and have my kids accomplish in the virtual setting. As August was ending, I'm thinking, how am I going to hold my students' attention in an 80-minute Google Meet? Because we're block schedule and we do the block periods. What am I going to do with 80 minutes? Like, you put me in the classroom, I'm ready to go. Italian, talk with my hands, engage them, be funny. Now I'm going to have, 30, 35 larger class sizes of these kids in these Google Meets where, again, I know with the tech, I can break them out into smaller Google Meets with the Meet breakouts that are available now. I'm not sure how effectively I'll be able to translate some of my favorite projects and assignments, and even, will I be able to design new things that take advantage of the virtualness, What do you think?
No, I've been feeling very, very similarly. And I think our situations are slightly different since we teach, different age groups, but still all the same. I think it's really kind of scary, to be honest, thinking about like what I'm going to be doing, a couple months from now. I think there are, some strategies, but that I can conceptualize and I think hopefully will work. But you don't really know until you dive in and try. And so that's something that's been really weighing heavily on me all summer is how can I continue to build relationships with students in this remote environment? How can I make connections with students? How can I help students connect with each other? How can I, support a kindergartner, from a computer screen? Like these are questions that are weighing really heavily on me, in addition to, of course, thinking about how I'm going to be doing project-based learning. I think we had a little glimpse of it in the spring, but having, the summer to reflect, there's so many things that I really want to do differently. I want to dive more deeply into project-based learning. I think that one, sort of silver lining, I guess, of this whole situation is that distance learning in some ways does lend itself really well to project-based learning because students have, more, sort of in some ways they can have more ownership over their learning. But like with what you're saying about, being on Google Meet all day, we're doing something very similar at my school. It's pretty much nonstop Zoom blocks that are, live teaching times. And, everything you hear about teaching online is just constantly talking about the need for these short micro lessons. But our schedule isn't really allowing for that. So I think it just requires some creative problem solving from the teacher perspective to try and sort of wrestle with all these different issues.
Let me ask you this, because when you started, you mentioned that we do teach 2 different grade levels. And for listeners of the House of Ed Tech, they don't often get the elementary perspective. Can you provide some insight as to what PBL has looked like at the elementary level in STEM before all of this world-changing stuff happened?
So I'm a K-5 STEM teacher. So, PBL for a kindergartner at the beginning of the school year is very different from, PBL for a second half of the year 5th grader. So I've had to learn a lot about how to adapt my lessons to meet different ages, because I think it's just, like I said, end of the year 5th grader is very different from beginning of the year kindergartner.
I would hope so.
Yeah, but with kindergartners, I really like to just zoom in on one element of design thinking is something I sort of like to start the year off with. So we'll, really dive deeply into the, empathy stage of the design thinking process. And that'll be something that we really sort of zoom in on. And then, throughout the year, then we'll move more towards PBL in general, looking at, the seven sort of core stages of PBL, but, of course, more adapted for that age group. So an example of a project that I did in the spring in the winter with my kindergartners was we did this, basically introduction to robotics project. So I wanted to teach students how to code robots, but I also wanted to incorporate, some elements of, them practicing their writing skills, practicing, making things digitally on iPads. So basically what we did was we started off with them writing these on paper, all about me stories from the perspective of a robot, basically. So practicing, very basic writing skills and illustrations. And then from there, students then, turned that into something digital using this app called My Story, School Book, eMaker, something like that. So then they practiced with that. And then we did a period of sustained inquiry where we watched a lot of videos about robots. I showed this one video that I love to show little kids. They freak out about how cool it is. It's like, I think it's called 10 Amazing Robots That Are Changing the World or something like that from Boston Dynamics. And I show them, some examples of how robots could possibly change the world. And then we start exploring the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So then not only looking at how you would love to have a robot that can, cook you dinner, or do your homework or do all your chores for you, but how you also can have a robot that can make the world a better place. So then we, zoom in on the different UN Sustainable Development Goals, and then I help coach students to figure out which goal really resonates with them. So this sounds like a complex project, but it's something that kindergartners can really relate to, and then we move into the coding.
You're sharing this, and I'm like, she started by saying this is kindergarten. So what do you do with fifth graders? Are they building rockets, time machines? What are we doing?
No, I know it sounds really complicated, but, out of cardboard, these kids, put together their dream robots, and they write, stories about how they want their, robot to, solve some of the world's biggest issues. And so it's a really sweet project. I really enjoyed doing it. But
I'm also glad we're doing this as a podcast and it's recorded, because I will have to go back and, I've got a kindergartner at home, first year kindergartner. Glad he's not in his second year kindergarten. That would be a whole other story. But I'm like, all right, something with robots, and I can get him to write, because if I'm going to supplement and support him, here's something I can do.
Yeah. Also, this is over the course of many weeks. We're talking like, an 8-week project where I see them, a couple times, once or twice a week. So a very extended project.
As you say that, and I'm thinking, I don't really care about fifth grade because I've got a third grader. So what do you do in third grade, Maddie?
So funny. Do you actually want me to give a third grade example, or should I give my fifth grade one?
I am dead serious. What do you do in third grade? How do you start the year?
How do we start the year with third grade? Last year, so this year, my curriculum is a little bit up in the air, if I'm being completely honest. But last year, we started off with using Dash, the robot. Have you seen Dash before?
I have heard of Dash, yes.
Yeah, so we started off doing just general, block-based coding with Dash. So that's a really fun activity that I like to do with third grade. I'm trying to think of a tech integration PBL lesson that we did. So the way, I guess for some more clarity for listeners, the way my job works is that 1/3 of the time I'm a K-5 STEM teacher. Then 1/3 of the time I'm a tech coach, where I work with teachers to do tech integration projects in their classroom. So the one that I just talked about with kindergartner happened half in my classroom, but then half in their actual homeroom classroom teachers' classrooms as well. And then the other third of my job is more like general tech support for the school. So a third grade PBL example. So I live in Los Angeles, and in the winter, students go on a field trip to Olvera Street. So our third grade curriculum, the theme is Los Angeles. So in kindergarten, it's, your home and your school, your home. Then in first grade, it's your school. Then in second grade, it's your neighborhood. And then third grade, it's your city. So Los Angeles is the social studies theme for third grade. And so what we did was we took students on a field trip to Olvera Street, which is a, landmark in Los Angeles. And so for that lesson, students did a lot of practicing their creative writing skills by talking about what it might have been like to, be one of the pobladores living in Los Angeles during the time period. So that was one element of the PBL unit. We actually on the field trip brought, I have a 3D camera in my classroom, which is pretty awesome. So I brought the 3D camera so that then students could later on relive the field trip experience. And I sort of coached them through how we can add different landmarks to Google Expeditions. So then after they did their research about their field trip experience, then we put together a 3D tour of Olvera Street that they could then share with, the greater world, doing air quotes. So that was a really neat project where students basically kind of got to focus on one element, of Olvera Street that they found to be, very interesting, and we sort of added their short little captions and stuff to the Google Expeditions. And then the next year, third graders will then preview it before they actually go on the field trip. But we'll see what ends up happening with that field trip this year.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about life in the remote or the hybrid setting, you mentioned a great tool in Google Expeditions, and even Google Earth and Google Maps. Those are great ways that, okay, I'm sure field trips are going to be limited in a lot of places where kids are going to school in some way. So utilizing something like Expeditions in Meet and Earth will allow you to take your kids places, and what you're doing with the 3D camera, you're giving kids the opportunity to take ownership of where they've been able to go. So there are certainly a lot of projects where maybe kids can take pictures around, again, their neighborhood, their block, their apartment, their house, and do some practical applications in math. And you can bring in social studies, and, I'm sure there's a way to bring in science, and just kind of maybe build a tour of their home kind of thing.
Absolutely. That's a really great point. In the spring, actually, this wasn't a project led by me, but some of the kindergarten teachers at our school.
Nobody's going to know.
Some of the kindergarten teachers at my school, there's this beloved field trip that they do at the end of the year where they go on a neighborhood walk around our school and look at all the different book nooks, like the little lending libraries. Have you ever seen those before?
Like little free library things? Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So
but you have a lot of them?
There's several in the neighborhood. There's probably like 5 or something, which for, a little kid is a lot. And so students will, at the end of the year, their favorite book that they read, they'll put it in the little lending library so that another kid in the neighborhood can, come read it. And so it's a really just a wonderful project that the kids always are really looking forward to. Because like I said, their sort of focus in social studies for that year is really looking at, home and school, and then they go on to then doing the greater neighborhood. So it's kind of a nice transition activity for social studies. But so students, they didn't get to do this activity in the spring, this field trip in the spring, and a lot of them were really disappointed about it because they had been hearing about it all year. So the kindergarten teacher, using Google Earth, she basically found street footage and imported it into Google Expeditions, and kids actually they all went individually with their families and dropped off the books in those libraries, and their grown-ups helped them take a picture of the lending library, and then the teacher put it all together in Google Expeditions so that the kids could still sort of have the experience virtually. So that's true that Google Expeditions is a really great tool when thinking about authenticity in PBL.
That right there is another important piece that teachers need to consider, and that's the level of authenticity that the project provides. I like to try to provide my kids with opportunities to take on those soft skills that beyond social studies or math or science, they can use later, whether it's, web design, graphic design, audio editing, video editing, writing, and using a lot of these technologies. Again, because the technology, whether it's physical or the software, might be gone in 5 years. But are those skills something that they can take with them? And at the high school level, I try to prepare them for life. Not that you're not at the elementary level, but there's a whole lot of life ahead of them when they're in the third grade. But then I also look at, what I do at the college level and what opportunities I can prepare the high school kids for, and then what I do at Rutgers, what opportunities can I provide those students to use technology and, again, make it authentic so they're not just, why am I doing this? I hate when kids have to ask, why am I learning this? Why do I have to do this? At least in my class, I can say, because, all right, if you play with Adobe Spark and you can present and you can get up and express what you learned, maybe one day you'll be asked to give a presentation at your job, or when you go out on job interviews now, you don't have to, struggle and fumble in talking about yourself. You're comfortable speaking and presenting, and project-based learning gives kids those opportunities to grow as people.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. That's such a great point. Is there a specific project that you just feel like really does that for your students, that you really feel like prepares them for life?
I don't think it's any one project. I think it's the combination. When I start the school year in September and October, I don't throw everything and the kitchen sink at them right off the bat. Over the last couple of years, I've made it a habit to kind of build, and I will slowly expose them to new tools as we go through the year. And I can really see the growth in my kids, from the first time they use something like Adobe Spark in, say, October, to what they will do with Adobe Spark. And then if they're app smashing and combining that with something else in, March and April, I give them the opportunity to grow. So I think, at least for my students, it's the whole experience. Again, getting them to grow from where they are in September. Most high school freshmen, when they walk in September, will tell you, if they tell you anything, that I'm not creative. I don't draw. I don't do this stuff. And over the 10 months of the school year, I can draw stuff out of them that maybe for some of them, they didn't know they had in them. And then they can look back at their body of work, because I do digital portfolios and I have them try to maintain a website throughout the year to kind of collect their best work. And they will comment in, May and June, wow, Mr. Nessie, I have done. Like, they'll tell me, yeah, what I did in September, yeah, that stunk, but look at what I can do now. And even if I'm being honest in my own lens, and I won't tell all kids this, but some of the stuff is still crap, but they have grown. And I have learned that progress is progress no matter what speed you move at. So forward is forward, whether you take one step and you trip, or you take 100 steps and it's a sprint, you still went forward. Mm-hmm. I try not to let kids go backwards.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I love that you're not just tracking student progress, but that you're really giving them sort of ownership over their own learning, where they're tracking their progress too. I love the idea of, students having a digital portfolio. I think there's just so much self-reflection involved in that is such a life skill that, kids will take with them from, beyond throughout life, beyond just the walls of your classroom.
Yeah. I mean, like I talk about those 4 C's, but there's also a big reflection component. I think reflection is also a big piece of project-based learning. And ultimately, in my mind, the way I think about it, when kids go and they go for their careers and they're on job interviews, and you may also agree, but for a lot of people, the hardest question to answer on an interview is, so tell us about yourself. And if students aren't prepared, if they've never reflected or even have thought about, well, who am I? And social studies is great for that, because we try to see how we fit into the world. So that's another thing that I'm trying to prepare them for, to be able to positively view themselves and be able to talk about themselves, not in a bragging way, but who am I and what am I proud of? So again, reflection is a big piece of that. So as they're building their portfolios and they're completing projects, there's a written reflection piece that goes with it, whether, they're writing something out by hand or they're recording audio or video in Flipgrid that we can kind of keep track of. There's so many possibilities, but mm-hmm. that's another thing that I think I try to focus on. And for you who's listening, make reflection a part of what you do with project-based learning, because yeah, you're going to grade the work and you'll have your rubrics and all that stuff, but it's that ownership piece. I preach. The subtitle to my class, whatever I teach, whatever I do, is "And Life Lessons with Mr. Nessie." That's the subtitle to any class I teach, college, high school, doesn't matter. So there is that element of, yeah, you need to take ownership. I'm not here to spoon feed you, mommy and daddy, or whoever pays the property tax at your house. You need to take ownership of your education and take pride in your work. So I try to build that up and bring them along, sort of spoon feeding them, but I'm shoving it down their throat by the end of the school year. And for me, the last 4 or 5 years, it's teaching freshmen. So I'm taking 13 and 14-year-olds and trying to turn them into very productive 15 and 16-year-olds when they become just sophomores in high school. But as I've seen classes go through and graduate, I've had seniors come back and tell me, I remember when we got to do the passion project, or I remember, the project, I did the travel project with my kids as well, where they had to budget and do everything, but we did it in Google Sheets where they had to learn about budgeting. And really, I didn't have the internet when I was in high school in the late 90s, to date myself, but I could tell kids, go out and get the actual price of a plane ticket, go find the price of the hotels, go to these websites and actually get the data. I mean, when I was in high school, we just made it up. But to get back to, and Maddie, sometimes you got to reel me in here. So sometimes the House of Ed Tech goes off the rails.
I'm the same way. I'm like, woo. When you were talking about reflection, and maybe this is just the elementary school teacher in me, but when I look at each of my students as individuals, like, I know that they're going to go through the K through 12 school system and life and beyond, and they're always going to have themselves. And so, themselves as individual people, like I'm going to have myself forever, right? Like, you're inside of yourself.
You are stuck with you.
You're stuck with you for your whole life. And so, maybe this is super cliche and like way too, warm and fuzzy, but you want kids to learn how to develop these positive relationships with themselves, where they do know what they're proud of, where they, can have, reflect on the things that are their strengths and their stretches. And, that's where I think kids do, fall in love with learning. I think when I was talking about my experience with project-based learning, like I fell in love with learning and with education largely because I learned stuff about myself throughout the process too. And so I think that reflection
is key
really
right there. Is learning about who you are as a student, as a person, for that personal growth. Again, the knowledge, the content, the flashcard information. I'm a history teacher, and there's a lot of stuff I forgot. There's a lot of things I forgot in math, but those skills and knowing who I am, again, I'm stuck with me. So. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I completely agree. I mean, you saying you're a history teacher and you forget stuff. I know you're a tech expert too, but I feel like I'm a tech expert and I still use Google almost every day for a tech question that I have, but it's those 4 C's, like critical thinking, creativity, all of that stuff, and I think reflection should be in there as well. Those are the things that I carry with me and the things that, set me apart, make me unique. And it's so important for students to know themselves as learners. I think that's like what you're saying. That's where personal growth happens, is when students do know who they are as learners, obviously who they are as people, but more specifically who they are as learners as well.
You mentioned warm and fuzzy, and there's a lot of warm and fuzzy that you do for kids and believe it or not, I am also warm and fuzzy for my students. But there's also that other side where students also need to be comfortable and learn how to deal with setbacks. I was going to say failure, and maybe I should. We're not going to be successful at everything that we do. As people who use technology, we know not everything is going to work the first time we try it. And part of what project-based learning will also teach students is how to fail. That first attempt in learning, or whatever acronym you want to, throw out there. But we need to also give students the opportunity to fall down. And I love doing that in school, because in life, there's no safety net. In our classrooms and in our schools, we and the teachers and all the adults who care about kids, we are the safety net. And I tell kids that at the college level. Make your mistakes. Screw up. Do it in this class before you get out there on that job interview or you're in that entry-level position. Screw up now so you can learn and move forward. And when you fail, you don't take it as this devastating, catastrophic life event because you made a mistake.
No, it's so important for kids to learn how to deal with setbacks. I mean, even when I reflect upon my own experience as a high schooler, if listeners can't pick up on it by now, my personality, I'm pretty type A in a lot of ways. I'm very much a perfectionist, and like in school, I didn't really experience a lot of like setbacks. I experienced a lot of setbacks in my personal life, my family life, but in terms of academics, I didn't really experience any setbacks because so many of my, tests and quizzes and things that I did in school, they were all, Scantron, multiple choice. And then, and I think that's one of the reasons why that project, my junior year of high school, really sticks out to me, is because that was the first time when I was like, we're not going to be tested at the end of this. Like, we get to make anything we want. I could not understand the ambiguity. It was very stressful for me. I remember the night before the project was due, I pulled like almost an all-nighter, which, is kind of crazy for a high schooler. But I spent so many hours
Not
up
today.
all night. Yeah, I guess that's true. I've been out of school for a little while. But I spent so many hours up all night just not knowing what to do. It was that ambiguity and uncertainty was very difficult for me. And I think I learned a lot from that, I think it's important for kids to have, failures, like you're saying, in, the safety net that is school, where teachers like us can be there to support students. I think we can help students have setbacks in ways that are age appropriate, ways that, help them learn rather than, lead to like self-doubt.
Maddie, it's funny. Something you just said also resonated with me when you talk about setbacks and pulling that all-nighter. This is also an opportunity through project-based learning. If you're the type of teacher who wants to buck, with a B, the trends in education and really change things up, students will thrive in this, but they'll also struggle. Because when we think about something like passion projects or Genius Hour, which is like project-based learning on steroids, students sometimes don't know how to deal with all that choice and freedom. I certainly see that at college, where I tell them, for the last 15 years, you have been told what to learn, how to learn it, how you're going to be assessed. Here's the test, and you have no control. In project-based learning, yeah, we will provide parameters and guidelines, but it provides a lot of freedom to, again, take that ownership. Again, that can be scary for a lot of kids when you tell them there's no multiple choice test or there's no essay to write. Whenever I am doing research to find projects, and I'm a good teacher, I beg, borrow, and steal all over the internet to kind of collect resources and projects, and I'll put my own spin on it. Whenever I find something that's really good, I will typically take out what I don't like about it, and most often that's like the write the paper option or something that I think doesn't push kids enough to be creative and kind of flex and work those muscles. So I will always put in podcasting or something with video or just something that's super high level creative, because I know, and I think it's worth it, if out of 150 kids, 1 or 2 try those things, that's a win.
Mm-hmm. Totally. If you were to ask me to describe like project-based learning in 2 words, I would say productive struggle.
Wait. Maddie, could you describe project-based learning in maybe 2 words?
Productive struggle.
I love productive struggle. That was, I should have had, I'll never get a tattoo, but I should have had that tattooed on me last school year, because I was all about letting kids struggle productively.
Well, you say tattoo. I actually already have that tattooed on myself.
Really?
No.
Oh. I'm gullible.
Now I lost my train of thought with that one. Oh yeah.
Productive struggle.
I think that in addition to, the kids who have never experienced the setbacks, like the students like I was in school who, get by with really great grades, I think it's also really, project-based learning is a really great opportunity for the kid who normally struggles so badly in school, who doubts themselves. It's a place for them to feel seen and heard, and for their, creativity and for them to shine. And I think that that's a really powerful thing about project-based learning is it's not just a time for the A students to struggle, but it's the time for the kids who school's not really their thing, for them to be able to shine. And I think that that's really powerful.
Like last year, I integrated TikTok as an option to create content in my classes. And I know I had maybe 10 or 15 kids who over the course of the school year were like, wait, we can do TikToks? Tell us more, Mr. Nessie. And I said, no, you're going to teach me. And I had, in one of my classes, I had 2 young ladies. They were fantastic and they were super creative once I had let them loose with history on TikTok. And they taught me like how to use the app, and, you know, and I told them this well after the fact that, like, girls, you taught me more than I taught you. And they're like, what are you talking about? I said, I was interested in this app, but you showed me how to use it. And I got to watch you go through the creative process and see how you think and how you made the content we talk about in class relevant and really pop, creating these 15 and 60-second videos. So that was just, you know, super fun to put the tool in their hands. And, you know, again, I'm not the smartest person in the room by myself. And that's something that I live by. Ask my wife.
That's so awesome. First of all, you probably became everyone's favorite teacher by letting them use TikTok in school.
I had other colleagues say, Nessie, what, you letting them do what? I said, it's working. I'm connecting with kids and they're connecting with the content. Well, who's going to argue with that?
I mean, it's a great example because it really shows that you're listening and leaning into student interests, which, in thinking about this upcoming school year, that's something that I'm really trying to figure out, is ways that I can engage students by leaning into their interests and by tapping into their interests. You know, Genius Hours obviously are really, you know, sort of the first thing that comes to mind when thinking about how I can allow students to explore their interests in my class. But I think, you know, even paying attention to, you know, the things that they do in their free time. And I'm not saying to, you know, become the coolest teacher, but just a teacher who listens to students, which I think is exactly what you did with that project.
Maddie, we can't go too far down the rabbit hole of having a heart and being empathetic as a professional teacher. People don't tune in for that.
I know. Sorry. Everybody's probably like, oh my gosh, get this elementary school teacher out of here.
You have to be empathetic. I don't spoon feed my kids, but I certainly care about them. You know, I mean, I'm not hugging them. That's a problem. But to care about them and lean into their interests, I love that. You know, and I didn't even think of it like that at the time. I was like, I don't care if you like me because of TikTok. I want to learn about the app, so let me put it in the hands of the kids. I was kind of sneaky about it. Like, I knew that they would teach me something, but I couldn't take the time myself to learn all about it. And I'm still leaning into learning that, you know, amongst other tools. But again, empower your kids. Projects do that. Giving them notes and preparing them to take quizzes and tests and learn how to copy stuff off the board, that doesn't prepare them for anything other than getting ready to follow directions.
But besides TikTok, what other tech tools do you think are really great for PBL?
So yeah, definitely the TikTok. I love Flipgrid for doing project-based learning for that reflection piece, where 2 years ago, again, the wrench got thrown into my plans last year, but 2 years ago, my co-teacher and I, we used Flipgrid and we had them do, have you ever heard of that show, The Office?
No, the most popular show of all time.
Yeah. So we had our students do Office-like confessionals as their reflection.
Oh, awesome.
So we called our Flipgrid the classroom. Really creative, right? So we had a little spot where they could sit in front of one of the Chromebooks, and I have windows in my classroom that went out to the hallway. So we had them sit there like they were in the office, but they were doing their classroom confessionals about their projects. So definitely something like Flipgrid for reflection. But again, at other levels, you can use Seesaw to do reflection and capture that content. And something as simple as recording videos and uploading it to Google Drive, or embedding video of you talking about something into a Google slideshow, you know, to submit that reflection piece. Certainly Google Slides. So we have them do Spark Pages, Spark Videos, again, for creating the presentations. For me, all projects include a presentation. The projects are sometimes individual, sometimes they're with a partner, sometimes they're in small groups, sometimes they're in large groups. So there's always that presentation component that sometimes leverages technology to present or create content. I've done with some projects where I set it up like a science fair, where we go around and I guess in social studies, it's more of a museum where they can go around and interact and they've got to present and talk. As much as I love tech, I don't lean on it a lot. There's always like a non-techie option, but it's not the essay option. Like tech will influence what you do, but it doesn't always have to be what you do. And yes, I'm saying that on the House of EdTech / EdTech Classroom.
Yeah, that's how I am too, though. I think a lot of people assume because I am so passionate about ed tech that I always want things to be all tech all the time. But I want kids to be doing things with their hands. I want them to be doing things offline too. I think I want kids to build healthy relationships with tech. That's why I went into this, especially at this age level. And I think tech can be a really wonderful tool to create and make really amazing, products and things and, projects. But it's not the end all be all for me. It's very much just a tool that I want my students to be able to use in a way that's healthy and productive and creative. One
of my favorite, do now bell ringers is I will just have my students draw with pen or pencil on a piece of paper. Cause I don't have the cool desks that you can write on. Although sometimes my kids think that they can. But I've pulled up videos of like how to draw, and it's not even related to history. It's just like how to draw Spider-Man. And it's like this guy, I'll include a link in the show notes for this, of this channel that I've used, where it's like how to draw the Hulk, how to draw Spider-Man. It's just all sorts of characters, but he's got this unique style and there's like a little kid with him. I think it's his son. I hope it's his son. And they do like a split screen where he's drawing and showing the steps, and you see this little kid who's 8, 9, 10 years old also drawing along. And then I have my kids also doing it in class, and we don't color it, but it decorates the classroom, and it's a quick, we do 5-6 minutes at the beginning, and it's just a way, again, flex that creative muscle. Because I don't know about you, a lot of kids think I can't draw. I'm no artist. If I was a really good artist, I wouldn't be standing here in front of you teaching, so it's okay. And it's fun. It's fun. God forbid we make learning fun.
Definitely. I'm all about getting, kids to make things out of cardboard and paper. And, of course, that's really, really embedded in general curriculum in elementary schools. But I think that, one of my favorite books, which maybe we can also put a link to in the show notes, is called Lifelong Kindergarten. It's by Mitchell Resnick. He's the creator of Scratch programming language in the MIT Media Lab. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's like one of my ed tech idols. The book Lifelong Kindergarten is basically the idea that kindergarten is becoming more and more like the rest of school. But really, the rest of school should become more and more like kindergarten. The rest of life really should become more like kindergarten.
I don't mean to cut you off. You're reminding me of this video I saw that literally brought me to tears he's 5. So he's my youngest, as he was about to start pre-K. And it was, I'll find it. It'll be in the show notes. And I've talked about it on the House of EdTech before, but it's this video. It's a cartoon where this father is bringing his son to school, and you just slowly see the creativity being stripped from this kid. It's like his first school experience, and he wants to draw and be creative and use color. And the teacher is like, there's no words, it's all instrumental, but the teacher is basically saying, no, do it this way. Don't be creative. Learn how to write your letters, all these things. And you just, you see the father coming out of work miserable, and the kid slowly, by the middle of this little cartoon featurette, comes out of school and it has the same demeanor as the father. It made me like look at my wife and be like, we got to make sure that our kids stay creative. As we're recording this, Sir Ken Robinson recently passed away, and his TED Talk, does school kill creativity? I am fighting against that every day in my classroom, to not let creativity be killed. I hope you are too.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think you would really like the book Lifelong Kindergarten. In addition to the 4 C's, it really talks about what he calls the 4 P's, which is passion, projects, peers, and play, and how those should also be really core pillars of education. Of course, creativity is sort of like almost an umbrella for all of those. But I recommend you check it out because I think you would like it a lot based off of our conversation so far.
Nice. I'm a big fan of kindergarten. I mean, I would be teaching elementary school if not for the fact that I wouldn't be teaching so much as I would be playing, because I'm going to be 40 in 2021, and I'm going to be 40. I look like I'm 50. I act like I'm 10. So I love the 4 Ps, and yes, they definitely would all fit under creativity. Those are things that no supervisor, no administrator is ever going to tell you to do those things. So those things that come into your classroom, whether it's project-based learning or not, that's got to be in you to want to create that experience in your classroom or in your school for the administrator who wants to make school a fun place. And, we're both on Twitter and Instagram, and we see people out there sharing the positivity and sharing what they're doing to make a difference, whether, you're the principal who's riding skateboards in the hallway or a tricycle out at recess. There are things that we can do to make this all enjoyable. Big tip, you can smile before Christmas. You should probably smile at your kids on the first day,
I filmed this hilarious, I thought it was pretty funny, tutorial video for my students to help them learn how to log into our learning management system. And I had I pretended to be our school mascot. I was eating cereal that on the box of the cereal box, I had basically almost Microsoft Paint style had created on my computer, this very poorly photoshopped cereal box cover with our school mascot on it. Then, pans over to the fridge that has my login information taped on it with teachers are definitely, jumping to try and connect with students in any way that they can.
I don't know if this is shifting gears, but it's certainly a classic Chris transition. But in a little bit of a rewind, you asked me some of the tools that I like, and quite frankly, I got so excited I don't even know if I really mentioned any tools. But let me ask you, Maddie, as an elementary school teacher who obviously is a fan of project-based learning, what are some of the tools that you incorporate into your class with your students?
Definitely. I really like Flipgrid. I think that's the tool that you mentioned. I think you also mentioned
one.
I think you also mentioned Seesaw, which is another one that I was going to say. I really like Jamboard. That's a tool that I'm really excited about. Jamboard and Padlet. I know they're similar, but I think they have different affordances. I think that those can be really great for helping students identify, the challenging problem or question that they're trying to come up with for PBL. I think it's really great. They're really great brainstorming tools. Google Expeditions, like we said, can be a really great tool, especially when thinking about teaching PBL remotely, because it can still bring back that authenticity of allowing students to be able to go on virtual field trips. And even when we're all back 100% and things are normal, Google Expeditions is just a really great tool if you let's say you wanted to do something like that Brooklyn Bridge project that I did. You can visit the Brooklyn Bridge on Google Expeditions, I would assume. There's just so many really awesome ways that you can visit places without actually physically going there. So I think it's a really great tool for PBL. Another one that obviously is being talked about all the time right now is Zoom and Google Meet. What's really neat about video conferencing is you can invite experts to join your class who you might not otherwise be able to have come. I've seen, tons of children's book authors who have been Zooming into, elementary school classrooms who, if you invited them to come to your physical classroom, they might not be able to make it, but have, offered up their time to do that remotely. I think you can even do sort of the mystery classroom thing where you can, Zoom in with another group of students around the world. So I think that can be a tool that you can use pretty creatively when thinking about teaching remotely as well.
Based on our conversation, I think you do a lot more than I do, and quite frankly, have more experience than I do. So in the document that we're kind of referring to, you have a number of resources. So I'll share the one that I put in, and then you could share all the resources that you put in. And I think if you are interested in project-based learning at any level, definitely check out from the Hacking series, Hacking PBL by Ross Cooper and Aaron Murphy. I know both of them because it seems like all the great people in education are from the East Coast. No offense, Maddie, I'm a West Coaster. That's an episode for another day. Reach out to them, connect with them on Twitter, buy their book, read their book. A lot of great resources. And again, if you're a fan of the hacking series, and Maddie, you mentioned that you are when we started, definitely a valuable resource. But in looking at this list, you've got some other ones that I did click on. So please share the love.
Yeah, for sure. I am like a little fun fact about me. I'm a total like research pedagogy nut. I like really love to read. So I'm constantly like, trying to find resources. It's just like a pretty weird quirk of mine, but I just love all things related to research. I just love being a student while I'm also a teacher. So the first one I have on my list here is Redesigning American High Schools for the 21st Century. This is more of like a kind of like article essay style in the Stanford Social Innovation Review. It's just a really critical look at what high schools look like. I know this is a cliche thing that people, in education and ed tech specifically talk about all the time, but this industrial model of education that we're trying to get away from. Now, I personally don't know too many teachers whose classrooms, closely resemble, factories anymore. But I do think that there are still some of these sort of factory model type principles that do exist in education. And so it's I found it to be, the first time I read it, a refreshing read to think about ways that we can reimagine American high schools. So I thought that might be something that your listeners would like, since that's probably more your audience. Then I have PBL Works in general. So PBL Works is really great. They have sort of the gold standard for project-based learning. So whenever somebody's, really interested in project-based learning but isn't really sure where to start, I always direct them to PBL Works, because their sort of gold standard model is, I think, the gold standard of PBL. So it looks at, the 7 different core pillars of PBL. So from, challenging problem or question, sustained inquiry, authenticity, student voice and choice, reflection, critique and revision, public product, all that stuff. It's a really great resource as well. And then, the next one, Student Outcomes from High Quality Project-Based Learning, a case study for PBL Works. It just, dives more deeply specifically into student outcomes from PBL. So instead of just, giving you big pie in the sky theory of what, good PBL is, it actually looks specifically about how PBL can boost student outcomes. So I like that one as well. And then Keep It Real with PBL by Jenny Pyrat is a amazing resource. She is sort of one of the PBL experts that I really look up to. I think I heard her for the first time on Cult of Pedagogy podcast with Jennifer Gonzalez. But she's done a ton of really incredible research in the PBL field. I know she does workshops and stuff. I've never met her, just huge fan. So
sounds like you should have her on your podcast.
Yeah, I know. I should reach out to her.
That's the beauty of having a podcast, is people will talk to you.
Yep, that's true.
Maddie, I don't want to say we're running out of time, because as a podcast, we have all the time in the world. For my audience, again, you host a podcast. Can you talk, basically pimp your podcast? Why should somebody who listens to the House of Ed Tech immediately listening to this episode go and subscribe to your podcast?
Ooh, a lot of pressure. So my sort of...
Wait, no pressure. When you're done, go subscribe to our podcast. Now hear what it's all about.
So my podcast, basically, I seek to empower teachers to explore innovative and creative learning models in their classrooms. I talk about, all things from ed tech tools to, pedagogy. I really like to, talk about these big pie in the sky ideas, but really break them down into ways that are practical and applicable for teachers. I personally am super tired of this sit and get model of PD, which I know people are starting to get away from, but I like to have actual, concrete takeaways for people. So if you're looking for, practical, applicable tips that you can apply in your classroom tomorrow, whether it's related to PBL, ed tech, innovative teaching, STEM, all the above, come check out the EdTech Classroom podcast. You can find it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and maybe a few other platforms, but start there first.
and people should, and for you who's already subscribed to Maddie's podcast and you're like, I already know all this. Here's what I tell my audience all the time. Go tell somebody else about the podcast. When you're done with this episode, or anytime you listen to an episode of a podcast you enjoy, go tell somebody either about the whole show or somebody who you think should listen to what you just listened to. Share it out. Instagram, Twitter, face-to-face. Go in the faculty room and have a productive conversation with a colleague and not just like the crap we know that goes on or can go on in faculty rooms. Let me ask you this also, Maddie. Why did you get into podcasting? I
woke up one day and was like, maybe I'll start a podcast. Not because I like to listen to myself talk.
That's a great way to wake up any day,
No, I feel like I have a bunch of ideas in my head, and I thought podcasting would be a really great way to get it out. I started it largely for me to talk about the things that work and don't work in my classroom. I think it's largely reflective for me. If you come listen to my podcast, sometimes I'll talk about things that just utterly failed in my classroom, but I'll also talk about the things that worked. And so, going back to our conversation earlier about reflection, I think it's been a really great tool for me to use to be able to reflect on my practice as a teacher. But I also just love the EdTech community. I love collaboration. I've been a pretty long time listener of your podcast. I'm a long time listener of podcasts in general. And I like the idea of being able to collaborate and, get to know other teachers, because I think we are all so much better when we are putting our heads together. I think you said this earlier, but I don't want to be the smartest person in the room. And so I started my podcast, hopefully to have a platform for a larger discussion where people can collaborate and communicate their ideas together.
And now here's the funny thing. So people listening to this, whether they listen to both shows or if somebody has only listened to House of Ed Tech and they haven't yet listened to other episodes of your show, they might be thinking, wow, her show sounds really similar to this show I'm already subscribed to. But here's the difference, knucklehead. And I'm talking to the listener, not you, Maddie. Here's the difference, knucklehead. Maddie has different life experiences. Maddie has a different point of view, and that makes her podcast different. The collaboration, I reached out to you saying, hey, let's figure out some type of conversation. Let's collaborate and create content that ultimately in this conversation, I learned something from you. Maybe you learned something from me. I don't know yet. But our listeners will also get value and learn something because we didn't just say, well, I do my show my way. I don't want to talk to anybody else. Okay. So do that, again, we're leading by example. If we want kids to collaborate and communicate with each other, we have to do it ourselves. And yes, thank you for nodding your head. Yes, Maddie.
Yeah. I know people can't see me right now, but I'm nodding and smiling. We're teachers, but we're also lifelong learners. And I think the more you can listen and learn from other people's perspectives, the better.
And the more perspectives you hear, the better off you are. What you then do with those perspectives, go out and change the world, and then teach your kids how to do that as well. So to bring it all back, project-based learning will help you do that. Does it get any simpler? I don't know.
Yeah, project-based learning will definitely help you do that.
Was this fun? Did we enjoy creating a podcast together?
This was so much fun. Do you want to tell, before we wrap this up, do you want to tell my listeners about you too?
I host a podcast called The House of Ed Tech. You can find it at chrisnessy.com. If you want to go on your device and go to chrisnessy.com/go, it'll give you all the subscription options. My podcast is very much like what you're getting here on Maddie's show, but it's my perspective. And clearly you can tell I'm a different person than Maddie. I'm not a Maddie clone. So I bring a different energy, a different perspective, different life experiences. I have a passion for education, technology, and education. And what you can get from House of Ed Tech, it's, Maddie, I'm going to steal your words. I'm sorry, borrow. I don't know. I'm a teacher. You can hear something on my show today that you can use in your classroom tomorrow. And the motto that I live by is using technology isn't difficult. Just give it a try.
I love that.
Looks good on a t-shirt.
I'll get that tattooed next to productive struggle.
There you go. And I'm not getting any tattoos. Maddie, it'll be in the show notes, but for people, obviously people are going to go and subscribe to your podcast. Where can they also connect with you to learn with you and from you?
Definitely. You can follow me on Instagram at edtechclass.
She's really good at Instagram.
You can send me an email at myedtechclassroom@gmail.com.
She's not good at email. No, I'm kidding.
No, I'm honestly not that good at email these days. My inbox is just, every time I look, there's...
Not zero?
It's definitely not zero. And my website is edtech-class.com.
I'm at Mr. Nessie on Twitter, and you can find all of my stuff at chrisnessie.com, and that's N as in Nancy, E-S-I. Maddie, we'll have to do this again.
I know, this was so fun. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Before we end this magical crossover episode, we need to say hello to our House of Ed Tech VIP for this episode, and I want to introduce you to Stacy Young. She is a New Jersey-based educator that I recently got connected with on Twitter. She is currently the supervisor of English in the Bound Brook School District, and she's been doing that since 2018. She's been a teacher of English in a number of places. She's a graduate of the College of New Jersey, where she got her bachelor's in English and secondary education. She also has her master's of education in education leadership and administration, and she's currently working on her doctorate, which is super cool. And I know from knowing other people who have done that and are doing that, that takes a lot of work. So Stacy is committed to education. According to her Twitter profile, which you can find at Ask Stacy Young, and that's Stacy, so don't throw the extra E in there. She is a teacher, a reader, and she's a disruptor. And so far in the short amount of time that we've been connected, I've enjoyed reading her tweets and learning from her, and I think you would as well. So go out to Twitter and connect with Stacy Young. Again, she is at Ask Stacy Young, and congratulations to you, Stacy. You are the House of Ed Tech VIP. Thank you for listening to this episode of the House of Ed Tech podcast. Be sure to check out and support this episode's sponsor, Whitebook. Remember to support the people who support the show. Promo code House of Ed Tech will save you 30% at checkout. Thank you again, most importantly, to Maddie from the EdTech Classroom podcast. It was a wonderful conversation about project-based learning and how education technology can support that. Make sure that you subscribe to Maddie's podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. And let's keep the conversation going about this or any episode. I would love to connect with you and hear your thoughts on the information and resources. You can go out to chrisnessie.com/163 and leave a comment, get the links to everything we talked about, or you can send feedback by going to chrisnessie.com/feedback. And let's be sure we send Derek a lot of feedback over the next 6 episodes, because I will make sure he gets the emails and the voicemails, and anything else you send in, he will get it and he will share it. If you enjoy the House of Ed Tech podcast, and I know you do, and you're excited that there's going to be no break, so go tell somebody else about the podcast. You don't have to tell them that it's not me who's hosting it right now, but again, share it. That would be wonderful, because word of mouth is the best way to share a podcast you love. You can also still become an awesome supporter of the show. Many thanks to my awesome supporters who went out to chrisnessie.com/awesome, and they support the podcast. Thank you so much to Anthony Arnaud, Dan Gallagher, Carlos Garza, Peggy George, Jeff Herb, Mike Messner, JP Presevento, Lori Simpson, and of course, Kyle Wilcox. Thank you to each and every one of you for your support of the show. And if you are interested in becoming an awesome supporter, it's super easy. Go out to chrisnessie.com/awesome, and you can do that. The next episode of the podcast, House of Ed Tech number 164, will be hosted by my man, Derek Larson. He will be in the power chair. He will be behind the mic, and he's going to be bringing you some awesome content. That episode is going to come your way on September 20th, 2020. One last announcement before I go. There are still 8 limited edition 3D printed House of Ed Tech coins available. If you'd like to be one of those people who has an awesome collectible and support the podcast, go to chrisnessy.com/coin, COIN. Until next time, thank you for learning with me. I look forward to you learning with Derek. And of course, remember, using technology isn't difficult. Just give it a try. And I'll see you in December.